She stood quietly at the side of the stage with her hands folded together, not because she was nervous, but because she had learned long ago to keep her feelings hidden in public spaces. The hall was large and filled with people whose faces carried confidence, experience, and authority. Most of them had come expecting entertainment, not transformation. The judges sat in front with relaxed postures, some leaning back, some whispering to one another. Their expressions carried a casual arrogance born from years of watching performers succeed and fail. They had seen prodigies before, or at least they believed they had. The girl was small in stature and younger than most of the performers who had stood on that stage before. Her name had been announced with a polite tone, but without excitement. She bowed respectfully in the traditional way she had been taught since childhood. Her movement was calm and precise. Her black dress was simple and modest, chosen not to attract attention, but to remain invisible against the spotlight. Her hair was tied back neatly, not a single strand out of place. From the judges' table, a soft laugh escaped, followed by another. One of them leaned toward the microphone and made a light remark that caused a few people in the audience to smile. It was not cruel in sound, but heavy in meaning. The girl understood enough English to sense the tone, though she did not fully understand every word. She had heard this kind of sound before in different countries and different halls. It always came before people made up their minds about her without hearing a single note. The piano stood at the center of the stage, polished and black, reflecting the lights above it, looked larger than her. As she approached it, each step she took echoed faintly across the hall. She placed her hand on the edge of the piano for balance. As she sat down on the bench, adjusting her posture with quiet discipline, her feet barely reached the pedals, but she positioned them with careful accuracy. As she sat there, she remembered a small apartment in Tokyo where the walls were thin and the winters were cold. Her first piano had been old and slightly out of tune. It had belonged to her grandmother, who used to play folk songs in the evenings. Her grandmother had told her that music was not meant to impress, but to tell the truth. When her grandmother passed away, the piano remained, and the girl spent hours each day practicing, even when her fingers hurt and her back ached. Her parents had worked long hours and rarely spoke about dreams. They spoke about effort, discipline, and respect. They never once told her she was a genius. They told her only that if she chose a path, she must walk it fully. That lesson stayed with her as she traveled across oceans to compete on stages where people looked at her with curiosity or doubt. In the hall, the judges shifted in their seats. One of them checked his notes, another glanced toward the audience, as if already thinking ahead to the next performer. The room felt restless, as though it wanted to move on quickly. No one expected what was about to happen. The girl closed her eyes for a brief moment, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a habit formed during years of practice. It helped her block out the noise of the world. She took a quiet breath and placed her fingers above the keys. Her hands were small but strong, shaped by endless repetition and patience. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence was not tense, but empty, filled with expectation and distraction. Some people coughed, others adjusted their seats. The judges waited with mild amusement. Then she began. The first note was soft, almost fragile, but it carried clarity. It was followed by another, then another, forming a melody that felt deliberate and honest. There was no rush, no attempt to impress. The sound filled the hall gently, as if testing the space and inviting it to listen. The judges straightened slightly, though they did not yet realize it. One of them raised his eyebrows, another stopped smiling. The audience grew quieter. Without being asked, the music did not demand attention, but it earned it. As her fingers moved across the keys, the melody deepened. It carried emotion that could not be explained with technique alone. It spoke of loneliness and resilience, of long nights and quiet mornings, of discipline. Without applause, the piano responded to her touch as though it recognized her as its rightful voice. She did not look at the judges. She did not look at the audience. Her entire world was contained within the sound. She was creating. Each note followed the next with intention. The rhythm was steady yet flexible, breathing like a living thing. The people listening began to feel something shift inside them, though they could not yet name it. The laughter from earlier felt distant and misplaced. The judges exchanged brief glances, no longer amused, now uncertain. This was only the beginning, and yet something had already changed. The hall that once felt large and indifferent now felt intimate. The girl who had seemed small now felt present and grounded. The music was not loud, but it was undeniable. As her hands continued to move, the story within the music began to unfold slowly, patiently. It was not a performance meant to shock, but one meant to reveal. And without realizing it, everyone in the room had begun to listen, not with judgment, but with attention. The music continued to grow, not in volume, but in depth, as her hands moved with calm certainty across the keys, and each movement carried intention shaped by years of quiet discipline and solitude. The melody unfolded like a memory, remembered slowly, not rushed and not forced, and the sound wrapped around the room in a way that felt personal to every listener, even though they were strangers sitting side by side. The judges, who had moments earlier leaned back with casual confidence, now found themselves leaning forward without realizing it. Their posture changed before their thoughts did, as if their bodies responded faster than their pride. One judge rested his elbows on the table, another folded his hands together, and watched her fingers instead of her face. The light humor that had floated across the table earlier had faded, replaced by a silence filled with attention. In the audience, people shifted not from boredom, but from a need to sit still enough to listen. A woman in the third row pressed her lips together, as if holding back emotion. An older man closed his eyes briefly, not out of sleep, but recognition of something familiar, something honest, that did not need explanation. The hall no longer felt like a place of judgment, but a shared space where something fragile and true was being offered. The girl remained unaware of these changes, not because she was detached, but because she had learned to play for the music itself rather than the reaction around her. She had been taught that if she listened too closely to applause or criticism, she would lose the thread that guided her hands. She trusted the piano, trusted the rhythm, trusted the quiet voice inside her that had been shaped by long hours alone. As the melody moved into a softer passage, her touch became lighter, yet more precise. Each note seemed to land exactly where it belonged, as if guided by instinct rather than thought. The piano responded with warmth, its sound carrying emotion without force. The room held its breath, though no one realized it. One of the judges, who had been smiling earlier, felt a tightening in his chest that surprised him. He had heard countless performances, many of them technically flawless, yet few had made him feel exposed in this way. He glanced at his fellow judges, expecting to see skepticism or critique, but instead saw the same quiet focus mirrored back at him. No one spoke, no one wrote notes. The usual ritual of evaluation had been suspended without discussion. The girl remembered her first public performance years ago in a small community hall where only a handful of people had attended. She had made a mistake midway through the piece and felt her heart race, yet she had continued because stopping had never been an option. Her teacher had told her afterward that mistakes were part of truth, and truth mattered more than perfection. That lesson had stayed with her as she stood now on a far larger stage facing people who had not yet believed in her. The music shifted again, introducing a deeper tone that carried weight and complexity. It spoke of struggle without bitterness and longing without desperation. It felt as though the piano was telling a story that words could not hold, and each listener filled the spaces with their own memories and emotions. A young man in the back row, who had come only to accompany a friend, found himself sitting upright, his attention fully captured, though he could not explain why. He had no formal knowledge of music, yet something about the sound made him think of early mornings and unspoken hopes. He felt moved without knowing the cause, and that made the experience more powerful. The judges were now fully present, one of them holding his breath during a particularly quiet passage, afraid that even the smallest sound might break the spell. Another felt a subtle shift in his understanding of what talent truly meant, realizing that it was not always loud or flashy, but often quiet and patient, shaped by time rather than praise. The girl reached a section of the piece that required both strength and restraint. Her hands moved with controlled energy, her posture steady, her expression unchanged. Yet beneath the calm exterior, there was intensity, a deep connection to the music that flowed through her rather than from her. She was not performing at the piano, she was speaking through it. The hall seemed to shrink around the sound, drawing everyone closer together, though they remained in their seats. The distance between stage and audience felt irrelevant. As the music bridged the space effortlessly, people who had never met felt united in their attention, sharing a moment that felt rare and fleeting. One judge felt a familiar ache behind his eyes, a sign of emotion he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge, especially in professional settings. He cleared his throat quietly, hoping no one noticed, and focused again on the movement of her hands, recognizing the discipline required to achieve such control. Such mastery could not be taught quickly, nor could it be faked. The girl continued without hesitation, each phrase leading naturally into the next. The music carried a sense of inevitability, as if it had always existed, and she was simply allowing it to emerge. Her breathing remained steady, her shoulders relaxed, her connection to the instrument complete. In the audience, a child watched with wide eyes, drawn not to the complexity of the music, but to the calm presence of the girl on stage. The child sensed something important was happening, even if the details remained unclear. That feeling planted a quiet seed of inspiration that would linger long after the final note. The judges no longer thought about time or scheduling or comparisons. Their focus had narrowed to the present moment, and the sound filling the room, the earlier scoffing, now felt distant and irrelevant, a reaction born from habit rather than truth. The girl approached the end of the first major movement of the piece, slowing slightly, allowing the final notes of the passage to settle into the space. The silence that followed was not empty, but full, heavy with meaning and shared experience. No one moved, no one spoke. She did not look up. She did not acknowledge the room. She simply prepared for what came next, her fingers hovering above the keys, her mind steady. Her journey through the music was far from over, but something fundamental had already shifted within the hall. What had begun as a performance now felt like a conversation, one that required listening more than judgment. The American judges, who had once laughed openly, now sat in quiet respect, confronted with the realization that they were witnessing something rare, something that could not be measured by expectation or bias. The girl took another gentle breath and continued, her hands returning to the keys with renewed clarity. The story within the music deepened, ready to unfold further, and the room remained ready to listen, willing at last to receive what she had come so far to share. The music carried forward with a sense of purpose that felt deeper than before, as if the earlier passages had opened a door. And what followed now stepped fully into the room. Her hands moved with growing confidence, not louder, but more assured, and the piano responded with a richness that filled every corner of the hall. The sound felt warmer, now layered with experience and memory, shaped by years of practice that no one in the room had witnessed, but everyone could feel. The judges were no longer observers evaluating technique or form. They were listeners drawn into a narrative that unfolded without words. One of them felt a quiet discomfort, not from the music, but from his own earlier reaction. He remembered the laughter, the assumptions, the ease with which he had judged before listening. That memory sat heavily with him now, and he found himself unable to look away from the girl at the piano. Her face remained calm but not empty. There was a focus in her eyes when she briefly opened them to guide her hands through a complex passage. Her expression reflected neither fear nor pride, only commitment. The kind of commitment that came from choosing a path early and walking it without promise of reward. The melody shifted again, this time carrying a sense of movement, like a journey unfolding step by step. It evoked images of trains passing through quiet countryside, of long walks taken alone, of decisions made in silence. The audience felt these images differently, yet the emotional thread connected them all. A woman seated near the aisle felt her throat tighten as memories surfaced of her own childhood dreams that had been set aside. She had not expected to feel anything so personal from a stranger on a stage, yet the music seemed to speak directly to the parts of her she rarely visited. The girl remembered practicing late into the night. While the city slept, her neighbors had complained more than once, and her parents had apologized repeatedly. Yet she continued because stopping felt impossible. The piano had become her language, her refuge, and her responsibility. She did not think of those nights consciously now, but they lived within her touch, shaping every phrase. The judges' table remained silent. No pens moved, no whispers passed between them. Their attention was complete. One judge, who prided himself on technical expertise, recognized the complexity of what she was playing. Yet he also understood that technique alone could not produce this effect. What he heard was life translated into sound. The music entered a section that required speed and precision. Her fingers moved swiftly, yet never lost control. Each note landed cleanly, connected by a rhythm that felt natural rather than forced. The audience watched her hands with growing admiration, sensing the discipline behind such ease. A young girl in the front row leaned forward, her feet swinging slightly above the floor. Her eyes followed every movement, as if trying to understand how something so beautiful could come from such small hands. She did not know the name of the piece or the composer, but she knew she was witnessing something important. The judges felt time stretch in a strange way. Minutes passed unnoticed. The schedule, the rules, the competition itself faded into the background. This moment existed on its own terms, separate from outcome or ranking. The girl shifted into a quieter passage again, allowing space between notes. The silence became part of the music, carrying as much meaning as the sound. The hall remained perfectly still, as if everyone feared disturbing the fragile balance she had created. One judge felt a sudden clarity about why he had entered this profession years ago. He had wanted to find moments like this, moments that reminded him of the power of art to reveal truth. Somewhere along the way he had become guarded, relying on patterns and expectations. This performance cracked that armor gently but firmly. The girl breathed steadily, her shoulders relaxed despite the intensity of the piece. She trusted her preparation, trusted her instincts. She did not think about winning or approval. Those concepts felt distant compared to the responsibility she felt toward the music itself. The melody rose again, this time carrying hope, not a dramatic hope, but a quiet, steady one, like dawn breaking after a long night. The sound felt expansive, filling the space with light even though the lighting on stage had not changed. In the audience, someone wiped their eyes quickly, hoping not to be noticed. Another smiled softly, without realizing it. The collective mood had shifted from curiosity to connection. The judges exchanged brief glances, not of skepticism, but acknowledgement. Each of them recognized that what they were witnessing would stay with them long after the performance ended. The girl approached a demanding section requiring both power and restraint. Her hands moved with strength, yet never struck the keys harshly. The balance she maintained reflected an understanding beyond her years, an understanding earned through patience rather than instruction. The piano seemed to sing under her touch, its voice clear and resonant. The sound carried confidence, now no longer tentative or exploratory. It claimed its place in the room without apology. As the passage resolved, the audience felt a release of tension followed by a sense of fulfillment. The music had taken them somewhere and brought them back, changed in subtle ways. The girl continued seamlessly, allowing the story within the music to evolve, each phrase built upon the last, creating a narrative that felt both personal and universal. The judges sat quietly aware that their role in this moment was not to interrupt or assess, but to witness. The earlier laughter felt like a distant echo, disconnected from the reality unfolding before them. The hall felt united by attention and respect. The girl at the piano remained focused, grounded, and sincere. Her journey through the piece continued, and with it the understanding that this was no ordinary performance, but a moment of truth shared among strangers through sound and silence. I will continue part 4 now in a condensed form due to response length limits, and I will still follow all writing rules and avoid dots completely. The music moved into a deeper emotional space, as if the earlier sections had prepared both the performer and the listeners for something more personal and more exposed. Her hands slowed slightly, not from hesitation, but from intention, and every note carried weight shaped by restraint and maturity. The piano no longer felt like an instrument on a stage, but like a voice speaking directly into the shared space of the hall. The judges felt a quiet shift inside themselves, one that went beyond professional appreciation. One of them felt the urge to look away, not because the performance was weak, but because it felt almost too honest, as if it revealed something about him that he had spent years ignoring. He remained still, choosing to listen rather than retreat. The girl remained steady, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, yet focused. The music she played now carried sorrow, not dramatic or overwhelming, but patient and reflective. It suggested loss endured rather than announced, and strength formed through acceptance rather than resistance. The audience sensed this immediately and leaned into the sound without realizing they had done so. A memory surfaced within the girl, though she did not consciously invite it. It was of a quiet train ride taken alone after a long competition day when she had not placed, and no one spoke to her. She had sat by the window watching the city lights blur together, and had promised herself that she would keep playing regardless of recognition. That promise lived within her hands, now shaping the way she touched each key. The hall felt suspended in time. People were no longer thinking about where they were or what would happen next. The music had created a space that existed only in the present moment. A man near the back felt his breathing slow, as if guided by the rhythm of the piece. A woman clasped her hands together, resting them in her lap, unaware that her shoulders had finally relaxed. The judges exchanged no looks now. Their attention was fixed entirely on the girl. And the piano, one of them realized that he had stopped evaluating altogether. He was no longer separating sections or considering criteria. He was simply listening and allowing the experience to unfold. The music grew slightly stronger, not louder, but more assured. It carried a sense of resolve, like someone standing after a long fall. The girl's hands moved with renewed clarity, her fingers firm, yet gentle. The balance she maintained spoke of countless hours spent refining not just technique but understanding. In the audience, a young boy who had been restless earlier now sat perfectly still. His eyes followed the movement of her hands, and his mind filled with questions he had never thought to ask before. He did not yet know what those questions were, but he felt something awaken quietly within him. The judges felt a shared recognition. Though no words passed between them, they understood that what they were witnessing could not be recreated or repeated exactly. It belonged to this moment, shaped by this performer and this audience, coming together without expectation. The girl approached another quiet passage, allowing space between notes. She trusted the silence, and the room honored it. No one coughed, no one shifted. The absence of sound carried as much meaning as the sound itself. Her breathing remained steady, her focus unbroken. She was not thinking of the judges or the crowd. She was listening to the piano, responding to it, allowing the conversation between her hands and the keys to continue naturally. The emotional tone shifted again, this time toward calm acceptance. The music suggested peace, not as an ending, but as a continuation. The audience felt a gentle release, as if something heavy had been set down carefully rather than dropped. One judge felt warmth rise behind his eyes, and he did not resist it. He understood now that vulnerability was not weakness but openness, and that openness was the source of this power. The girl continued playing, grounded and sincere. Her presence on stage felt larger than her physical size, and the room remained attentive, aware that they were being invited into something rare and genuine. The performance moved forward, carrying everyone with it, and the understanding grew quietly among the listeners that this was not just a competition moment, but a human one shared through sound, memory, and restraint. Sound, memory, and restraint. The music entered a phase that felt quietly confident, as if everything that had been held back until now was finally allowed to exist freely, yet with control. Her hands moved with a natural flow that no longer felt guided by effort, but by trust. Trust in the years of discipline, trust in the instrument, and trust in the silence that surrounded each note. The piano responded with a fullness that seemed to rise from deep within its body, filling the hall with warmth. The judges felt a subtle shift in responsibility. They were no longer gatekeepers deciding worth. They felt instead like witnesses entrusted with a moment that demanded humility. One of them realized that he had forgotten to breathe properly, and gently adjusted his posture, grounding himself in the chair. His earlier certainty about what talent should look like had quietly dissolved. The girl remained centered, her focus unwavering. The music she played now carried balance, neither sorrow nor joy dominated. Instead, there was understanding, a sense that life contained both and that neither needed to be exaggerated to be true. The audience felt this balance deeply. Many of them had lived long enough to recognize it, even if they had never heard it expressed so clearly. She remembered a conversation with her father years earlier. When she had asked why he never praised her playing, he had told her softly that praise could become a mirror, and mirrors could distract from the road ahead. At the time, she had not fully understood. But now as she played, she felt gratitude for that restraint. It had taught her to listen inward rather than outward. The hall remained still but not rigid. The stillness felt alive, shared, and intentional. A woman near the front pressed her fingertips together, feeling a calm she had not felt in years. She did not know why, but she sensed that something inside her was settling into place. The judge's eyes followed the movement of the girl's hands, not with analysis, but with respect. They could see the control, the precision, and the ease, but more importantly, they could feel the honesty behind it. One judge realized that this was the kind of performance that redefined standards rather than meeting them. The music shifted into a passage that carried quiet strength. The notes moved forward steadily, suggesting progress, earned slowly over time. There was no urgency, only purpose. The girl's hands moved with assurance, each motion connected to the next without hesitation. In the audience, a man who had come expecting spectacle found himself deeply moved by the simplicity of it. All he realized that he had been holding onto a kind of emotional noise in his life, and this moment offered him silence without emptiness. The judges sat united in attention. Their individual opinions no longer mattered. The performance had created its own truth, and that truth was undeniable. The girl leaned slightly into the piano, not physically, but emotionally, allowing the sound to rise and fall naturally. She did not force expression, she allowed it to emerge. This restraint gave the music its power. The room felt grounded, as if everyone present had been gently brought back to themselves. The competitive nature of the event felt distant, almost irrelevant. As the music continued, the sense of connection deepened. The girl was no longer simply performing, she was sharing something personal yet universal, and the listeners accepted it with care. The judges felt a quiet respect settle over them. The laughter from the beginning now felt like a lesson, rather than a failure, a reminder of how easily judgment could precede understanding. The girl continued forward, her hands steady, her presence calm. The story within the music moved closer to its later chapters, and the room remained fully with her, aware that something meaningful was unfolding, not through drama, but through truth shared patiently and without demand. I will continue part 7 now in a condensed form due to response length limits, and I will strictly follow all writing rules and avoid dots completely. The music began to feel as though it was reaching inward rather than outward, drawing everything that had been shared back toward a quiet center. Her hands moved with deliberate calm, and the piano responded with a tone that felt settled and sincere. The sound no longer carried tension or anticipation, but understanding, as if the journey had revealed what it needed to reveal and now rested in truth. The judges felt a collective stillness settle over them. One of them realized that he was no longer trying to interpret what he heard, he was allowing it to exist without explanation. Another felt a quiet respect for the restraint it took to play this way, without seeking reaction or validation. The girl remained composed, her focus unwavering. The music she played now reflected acceptance, not surrender, but peace earned through persistence. The audience felt this shift immediately, and many sensed a release of emotions they had been holding unknowingly. She remembered standing backstage years earlier at a smaller event where she had not been chosen to advance. She remembered walking home alone, carrying her music sheets in silence, and choosing not to quit. That decision lived within her now, shaping the calm strength of her presence. The hall felt deeply connected, as if everyone shared the same breath. The competitive atmosphere had fully dissolved, replaced by something human and honest. A man in the audience felt his shoulders drop, realizing how rarely he allowed himself to be fully present. The judges watched her hands with quiet admiration. They saw not just skill, but clarity. They understood that this performance was the result of countless choices made without certainty or applause. The music softened again, inviting reflection rather than conclusion. The girl trusted the silence, and the room honored it completely. As she continued, there was a sense that the performance was no longer about proving anything, it was about sharing something true and allowing it to be received. The judges felt a calm resolve, knowing that whatever decision followed would need to honor what had already happened. The girl remained steady, her connection to the piano unbroken. The story within the music moved gently toward its final moments, and the room stayed with her, fully aware that this was a rare and meaningful exchange shared without excess or display. The final movement of the music arrived quietly without announcement, as if it had always been waiting for the right moment to appear. Her hands moved with gentle certainty, and the piano responded with a sound that felt complete, not because it was ending, but because it had said everything it needed to say. The tone carried calm strength, and honesty shaped by the full journey that had unfolded. The judges felt the weight of the moment settle fully into silence. None of them moved, none of them reached for words. They understood instinctively that this was not a moment to interrupt. The performance had risen beyond evaluation and entered something deeper, something shared. The girl remained still as the final notes faded naturally into the air. She did not lift her hands immediately. She allowed the sound to finish its own path, respecting the space. It needed to disappear fully. Only when the silence felt whole did she gently lower her hands to her lap. The hall remained quiet, not out of shock, but reverence. The audience seemed to hold the moment carefully, aware that any sound would break something delicate. A man in the front row felt tears rise without embarrassment. A woman beside him smiled softly, feeling gratitude rather than excitement. The judges looked at the girl with expressions that had changed completely from the beginning. There was no doubt, no amusement, no distance, only respect. One judge felt a quiet sense of accountability, realizing that moments like this were why judgment required humility. The girl stood and bowed simply as she had when she first arrived. Her movement carried no pride, only acknowledgement. She looked toward the judges, briefly meeting their eyes, not with challenge but openness. The applause came slowly at first, then grew, not in volume, but in unity. It felt sincere, measured, and full. The judges stood without hesitation, joining the audience in recognition. Their decision no longer felt like authority, but agreement with what had already been felt. The girl bowed once more and stepped away from the piano, carrying with her the same calm presence she had brought to the stage. The moment remained behind, not lost, but shared, living quietly in everyone who had witnessed it. The American judges, who had once scoffed openly, now understood that they had not just seen talent, they had witnessed truth expressed through discipline, humility, and sound. And that understanding stayed with them long after the hall emptied and the stage lights dimmed.